but just from the outset I'd like to mention perhaps the Primetime Investigates programme last night, which I know has touched a lot of us, and I think particularly because I'm here to speak about special needs, and I'm here because of these matters that I'm raising today from As I Am, and I know that As I Am have spoken on the radio this morning about how disappointed they are that the Department of Health has decided to take this this approach of really what I would see is it's very hard to understand how it can have a legal footing that people's personal details from their own private GPs could be given over to the Department of Health without their consent. And I would ask for the Minister's views on that matter, and I think that it's important that we as a government take this matter seriously. And I know that the Department of Health are going to speak to the committee today, and I think that that is welcome, and I'll certainly be following up on it. Secondly, the reason that I have asked you to be here today, and I'm very grateful to you for coming here today, is on the matter of individual educational plans. Now, in Ireland, unlike the US and Britain, individual educational plans are not on a legislative footing. They are on a statutory footing in the sense that the EPSN Act 2004 has quite detailed legislation around the necessity to provide individual educational plans for all pupils and students with special needs, and that has not been enacted. So I think that's the problem, as I see it. That's the problem that As I Am certainly identifies, and I'd like to refer to the letter from the department to ourselves on the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Education, further and higher education. And that letter is dated the 24th of November 2020, and it says, whereas there is not currently a statutory requirement to provide individual educational plans for children with special needs at present, all schools are encouraged to use education plans. Like either we're using them or we're not using them. And the problem is that I'm hearing from parents around the country, and obviously I'm not hearing from the students, but I'm sure that their voices would be just as strong on this, and that is that some parents don't even know that this exists. There's also a problem there with getting assessments. Many schools are saying that they get 2 or 3 days a year for assessments. And because of the lack of assessments, then it becomes hard to see how a school can put in place an individual educational plan. And that's not to say that many aren't fantastic. It's not to say that there aren't guidelines available. But I think this is what shows the importance of legislation, and that's what we're in this House for, particularly in the Seanad, is that we do value legislation and not just policy guidelines. And I know that the department may feel that it has gone in a different direction, but it is still very much saying that individual educational plans are important, and therefore it is very hard to see why it wouldn't actually enact all of the provisions within the EPSN Act. I simply don't understand that, and you'll know yourself that the part of that would include obligations on yourself in the department to follow up and to ensure that there is funding available. And I would hate to think that that's part of the reason that this isn't being commenced. I'm saying enacted, I mean commenced. So, look, I would love an update as to where we are now. I know that you've written in November, but I would like to think things have moved on at this stage. 2004 to now, that's a really long time to wait for this. We either think that students with special educational needs are important, or they're something that we're going to just put on the back burner. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator O'Reilly. Senator O'Reilly, you know, this is a commencement matter, and the Minister's here today. I know you mentioned RT documentary. We can't go into that today. The Minister's here to deal specifically with the individual education plans for students with special needs. I call on the Minister to reply to the commencement.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to address the concerns by Senator O'Reilly, just specifically in relation to the Department of Education, obviously, in which I'm a Minister, and the Department isn't aware of any instance of inappropriate sharing of information, and nor does it take lightly Chair, any decision to defend cases concerning children with special education needs and the rights of the child to an appropriate education under the Constitution, the needs of the child and a desire to act in the child's best interests are always at the forefront of any such decision. And you may know, Senator, in the defence of any legal proceedings, it is appropriate for the Department to engage with relevant state bodies, the school or education establishment in which the litigant is a pupil, to understand fully and appreciate the education provision on offer. And this is to ensure that any alleged deficiencies in provision can be appropriately considered, and in many cases to look at what further supports might need to be provided. And the statement that we issued to RT Investigates outlined comprehensively the Department of Education's position on defending litigation on sharing of data lawfully in this context, and it's also noted that the matters raised in the query from RT were of a general and unparticularised nature, and as a result the Department is only in position to respond on that basis. So the Department of Education, Senator, since you've raised it, would like to reassure all parents, families and interested parties that the Department has never unlawfully collected or passed on the sensitive educational information of children involving court cases. And I thank you, Chair, for your indulgence in that regard. In relation to the other issues that you raised, Senator, I thank you for raising them today. I think they're important points that you raise, and under the Education Act we know that schools have a legal duty to provide an appropriate education to all students, including young people with special education needs, and obviously they need to plan to ensure that this happens. And planning is an integral, normal part of a teacher's work, and planning tools like the student support file have been created as a resource to help schools provide for their students. Indeed, some parents may not be aware of the student support file, but I think that the schools should let them know about it if they're not aware of it. And the government, as you know, is very heavily invested and has heavily invested in education. We have $2 billion this year alone in relation to special education. And we have greatly increased the number of special education teachers. We have now 15,600, which is an increase of 39% since 2011. There are also two department circulars you might be familiar with, Senator, 0013 and 0014 from 2017, and they set out the basis for the allocation of special education teachers to schools and note the importance of educational planning in them. And this is to ensure that children with the greatest level of need receive the greatest level of support. And they're very clear, those circulars, that educational planning is an essential element of a whole school approach to meeting pupils' needs. It's also noted that planning for the provision of additional teaching support for pupils of schools is an important part of the process, and that coordination and planning time for this has been acknowledged in the allocation. So schools are therefore resourced to carry out planning, and support and guidance for these schools on how best to carry out the educational planning and to prepare student support plans is also available from the National Council for Special Education Service and from the National Educational Psychological Service. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Madigan. Sandra O'Reilly.
Thank you. Thank you to the Minister for responding to both of those issues. I think that we have to be very careful that when we're talking about education, that it doesn't sound like a doing to somebody, but that it's a collaborative practice. And in both of those responses, I really hope that the Department of Education is taking into account the fact that this isn't about defending ourselves. This is about our obligations as a service to the people in our society and to the children who are in those schools. It's a service not about defence and not about checking boxes. And it may be that planning is there within schools for every student, because every student needs to have their needs met. However, it is very, very clear, otherwise we wouldn't have a junior ministry position over special needs. It is very, very clear that some students need more than others. And if I look at some of the research, specifically mentioned Dr. Emer Ring here, who was saying that one of the key parts in relation to individualised planning is the promotion of collaborative practice, parental and pupil involvement. And that piece is not always there. And even in your response, with all due respect, it's that the school should try to let people know.
Okay.
But that's not good enough.
Thanks, Senator Riley. You have 1 minute, Minister.